mStoner, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our webinar today, Simplicity and Speed, Design and Usability for Multi-Device Websites. So I know that there are a number of attendees here who've attended some of our other webinars, so I bet you all know what I'm going to ask next. I just want to make sure that you can hear me. So tweet me, use the raise your hand feature, whatever it might be. Oh, Annalisa's on it. I imagine she knew I was going to ask that. So I'm seeing a number of hands raised and some tweets coming in, so wonderful. I really appreciate that. So really quickly, before I introduce our presenter today, I just have two housekeeping items. The first is that we're going to save some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So you can ask questions in one of two ways. You can tweet them to me. My handle is @MalloryWood, or you can tweet them to @mStoner Inc. Both your accounts will be participating in the back channel during the webinar, so you can tweet either of us. And today's hashtag is just simply #mStoner. So make sure you tag your tweets and your questions with the hashtag. If for some reason we don't get to your question, we will follow up with an answer on the blog next week, and we will also be posting the slides and the archive of this webinar, assuming that the recording works as we expect to, on mstoner.com later this week, and we will also email it out to you. The other way that you can ask questions is by using the chat feature and the questions feature right within the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you're not on Twitter and you have some questions to ask, just feel free to shoot that right through there. So that'd be great. So before we start today's webinar, I do want to remind everyone that we do webinars on a monthly basis, and we already have our next one scheduled. It will be on June 19th, and it's going to focus on lifetime engagement management. Our strategist, Fran Zablocki, will be doing that presentation. So we will have sign-up information coming out on the mStoner blog later this week, and we always email that sign-up information out through our intelligence e-newsletter. And if you're interested in signing up for that, just visit the mstoner.com homepage, and it's the top blog post article, and you can sign up for that e-newsletter. So let's get started. I'm really thrilled to introduce this session and today's presenter, Doug Kapinski. As a strategist at mStoner, Doug helps institutions create websites, print, social media, and mobile projects. Doug has been with mStoner for more than 7 years, and he leads our mobile and responsive design practice area. You can catch him presenting next week at the Penn State Web Conference on similar topics, and in the past he's also presented at Hyatt Web, EDUI, CASE conferences, and the UCDA Summit. So he's a seasoned presenter, and I always look forward to his webinars, and so I know that this is going to be really awesome. You can tweet Doug today at Doug Kapinski, and like I said, don't forget to use the hashtag mStoner so Doug can make sure he follows up with you after the webinar. So Doug, I have talked more than enough. I'm going to turn this over to you, and we can get started.
All right. Thanks, Mallory, for all the build-up. I want to let everybody know I haven't rehearsed this one, so I don't know if I can live up to all that, but I'm going to do my best.
You'll be great.
So here we go. A little philosophical prologue to this presentation, speed and simplicity, and talking about the multi-device web, is that this month at the Google Annual Developers Conference, Google I/O 13, they made some big announcements. One announcement that really didn't get much attention from the media in comparison to all of the things about Google Plus and so forth was a little game. You can get to this game by going to chrome.com/racer. I've always said you can tell a lot about the state of the web and the state of society from the games we play. And I think that there's a lot of little nuances to this very simple game that tell us a lot about where the web is. First, it's multi-device. You can play it on any iOS or Android device with a mobile connection. Second, it's multi-screen. It uses HTML and WebSocket protocol to compile a composite single screen from smaller screens. You can kind of see that in the animation here, that it's creating a large composite screen from multiple devices. Third, it's played through touch-based input. That tells us a little bit about where the web is headed as opposed to traditional input methods that we're associating with desktop and trackpads. It is able to be played with a single digit. I think that's a nuance of touch that we should pay attention to. Increasingly, with mobile, we're seeing that input is a single thumb or single finger with a single, they also say single eye. You can count on your user looking at your site with one eye and using one finger, one thumb to interact with it. And finally, it's built in the browser. It doesn't require any special downloads. You do have to have a Chrome browser, but there's no special app required. And finally, social is built in. You know, this is a game that you're meant to play with friends, and social is a big part of where the web is now. So it is a social game. Mallory gave me quite the build-up. That's so that you can put my voice with the face. Usually when I tell new people that I work for mStoner, they see something like this in their head. I would very much appreciate if you would debunk this myth of me by going to mstoner.com and saying that this is not what mStoner is all about. A little bit more factual stuff about who I am. I've been working in the web since '96. Current and past clients at mStoner have included Brown University, Columbia University, Kellogg School of Management. Prior to working here, I've worked with Sears, Kenmore, the Obama campaign. Recently, for responsive relaunches, we've been a part of 7 different large-scale responsive relaunches. We have 8 more going live this year. Also run a blog called responsive.ly with Erick Rowan from Notre Dame, who has a few cameo slides a little bit later in this presentation, provided me with some data and some samples that I'm going to share with you. In terms of sharing, Mallory went over it, but hashtag mStoner is the tag, and that's my handle at Doug Gopensky. If you want to tweet to me or follow me, I'll follow you back. We're going to post this presentation tomorrow on mStoner blog so that you can steal it. All right, a little bit of a menu. Gave you the prologue. Here's the menu for today. We're going to talk about ubiquitous internet. We're going to talk about planning for the multi-device web. We're going to talk about design, designing for simplicity. We're going to talk a little bit about tablets specifically because that's really where use and sales are headed. We're going to talk about speed and the importance of it to the entire web team. And we're going to talk about usability, post-desktop testing, and so forth. Ubiquitous computing is probably a term you've heard before. It's used to describe the world where computing is embedded seamlessly in everyday objects, where it's really invisible in everyday life. And this is definitely where the world is headed. The term was originally coined in '88 by Mark Weiser of Xerox PARC. You should look him up. You should look Xerox PARC up if you're interested in ubiquitous computing because you know, both he and Xerox PARC are relevant to ubiquitous computing. But I think, you know, the more I've been thinking about this recently, the more that I think it's really, for people who work in web professions, it's really more about ubiquitous internet. You know, I'm fascinated by the idea that Internet of Things exists. You know, this is an example. It's a device that you can attach to your baby's diaper that will report when the diaper is dirty. It's very fascinating, touches on a lot of issues, but really not relevant to my job. What's mostly relevant to me is the idea of ubiquitous internet. It's the idea that people from around the world on any device are going to be able to access sites that you design and build. You know, and so to me, ubiquitous computing, very interesting, but ubiquitous internet, a little bit more useful. Let's take a look at how ubiquitous the internet is right now, as of today, as of Q2 2013. About 61% of the world is currently offline. 39% is online. So it really isn't ubiquitous yet. We are seeing a huge spike in mobile broadband, though. So, you know, year-to-year or average quarterly growth from 2010 to 2013 Huge growth in the Americas, huge growth in Asia Pacific, outstanding growth in the Middle East, and really explosive growth in Africa. Total mobile broadband subscriptions 2007 versus 2013. 268 million in 2007, 2.1 billion in 2013. So even though things really aren't ubiquitous yet, we are seeing just tremendous growth, particularly in mobile around the world. This is the year that Google predicts the entire world will be online. So we can kind of line up that explosive growth from the previous slide with this idea that ubiquitous internet is coming, and it's coming very soon to the world. So what does this mean to us? You know, what does this mean to the people that work on the web, that design for the web, that develop for the web? The first reality is screens. You know, proliferation of screens, different screen sizes. And this idea kind of it's a hallmark of ubiquitous computing, but it's really relevant to that idea of people accessing your site. Mark Weiser, the guy that I mentioned on the earlier slide, in '91, he made this statement: the technology required for ubiquitous computing is cheap, low-power computers that include equally convenient displays. So are we there yet? You know, Acash Ubislate tablet released this year. It's available for $69 US, and it's subsidized by the Indian government, so students there can get it for $20. In Europe, there was a new smartphone released by a company called Archos, one of the cheapest Android 4 smartphones, available for $120. Pebble smartwatch, examples of lower quality displays that display more limited information, available for $150. And the Fitbit Zip fitness data collector is available for $60. And I think these devices specifically start to get at why the word multi-device is such a buzzword right now. Because, you know, if you look at the spec for responsive design, essentially what you see is that it's a browser spec. But it's quite possible that in the next couple of years, we're going to see devices that use data that's piped through the internet, but they don't use an HTML spec. They're taking data from some other API that's not specific to HTML. So I think it's important to make that distinction if you're thinking about responsive versus multi-device. Multi-device is not a browser. And finally, there's an idea incoming right now that in many objects down the road, sensors and connectivity are going to matter more than display. So Fitbit, the same company that makes that little sensor that tracks your heartbeat and your number of steps taken, also makes a smart scale. The scale display really isn't the important part. It does have an LED on it, but the important part is that it's transmitting the data from the scale to the Fitbit app. There's also a flower power sensor made by a company called Parrot coming out later this year. It's basically used to monitor the status of plant roots. So it's going to tell you when your plant needs to be watered, or if the plant's getting too much sunlight, that sort of thing. You know, but backing off from some of those wackier examples, again, the Internet of Diapers example or the flower power example, we've got to think about what's practical to right now. New resource that just came out this week, screensize.es. And by the way, when we post this presentation, all of the links in it are going to be live, so no need to take notes, but feel free to jump off any of the URLs that you see. This resource, screensize.es, shows you popular screen resolution, or pixel densities for all popular devices right now: smartphones, iOS, Android, tablets, and many desktop displays. I was taking a look at this, and what I discovered is that 6 basic screen sizes cover 22 of the most popular tablets. Now, the trick in this is, first of all, that it's tablets alone. Second, that it doesn't cover differences in pixel densities, which complicates the scenario. And it also doesn't cover this idea that with a tablet, you turn it sideways, and essentially you've got a different width. You've got a different resolution that you're designing for in terms of what a user is initially going to see when they arrive at your page. And I mean, that's only the tablets. You know, we're backing out from 12 different screen sizes more like 24 if you are accommodating different pixel densities. And that's not even getting into smartphones or desktop views or Xbox yet. Another big context to this whole thing about screens is use. It's not just about the fact that there are different screens now, it's about the fact that people are browsing a little differently than they used to. Sequential and simultaneous browsing are becoming commonplace. These words are kind of fancy speak for using more than one device and using more than one device at the same time. There's a Google survey called the Multiscreen World that came out earlier last year, August of last year, where they conducted a study with over 1,600 US consumers with internet access, ages ranging from 18 to 64, and studied their behavior over 24 hours. What they discovered is that 98% of the participants used more than one device to connect to the internet in a day. 90% browsed sequentially. So this means somebody started a task typically on a smartphone and then finished it on another device. 66% of people use more than one device at the same time. So that's, you know, the person using Xbox to watch television. They've got their tablet open, maybe to shop a commercial that they just saw, and maybe they're using SMS or something like that to connect with friends at the same time. 66% of people doing that simultaneous activity. And actually that's 81% if you include televisions as well. For simultaneous users, we had 78% of those respondents multitasking and 22% performing complementary activities. Now, a complementary activity would be something like using your smartphone to look up pricing for travel, where you're actually booking the travel on a tablet. And the other 78% of the use is really people doing more than one thing. You know, they have email open on the tablet, perhaps, and they're using the smartphone for SMS or some other kind of internet access. So how can we plan for this? You know, how can we plan for this increasingly complicated web? Whether it's a new responsive website that we're engaging with, or trying to retrofit our existing website to be responsive for visitors. The first thing, as a strategist, the first thing I like to do is look at our client's analytics. And there's three screens that I really like to go to first. You go to Standard Reports and Analytics and look under Content in that left column. And then click on In-Page Analytics underneath Content. It brings up a screen where you'll be able to click Browser Size in the right. From there, you can click Show Percentiles, and you can begin to get a sense of how many people can view your site at different resolutions. The thing that's most useful with this particular screen in Analytics is looking at the fringe cases. You can see people who are accessing your site at extremely small widths and extremely wide widths. Another screen that you're going to want to check out when you're engaging in a responsive relaunch or retrofit is this tab in the left column under Standard Reports, Audience, and Mobile. And what this starts to tell you is the percentage of your mobile visits at different screen resolutions, so tablet and phone visits at different screen resolutions. What you can see from this particular page is that most of them are likely on an iPhone. We see that 320 by 40, the standard resolution for an iPhone. So vast majority of visitors to this site are iPhone visitors. Finally, if you want to get to that specific devices, Standard Reports, Mobile, and Devices will give you a sense of what devices your mobile visitors are coming in on. And what we've noticed in higher education is that overwhelmingly that there's a high skew towards Apple devices. So higher ed doesn't really line up with some of the numbers you might be seeing from market or use share in other segments or global segments. For most .edu clients, it really is 50% or more of the visitors are iPad, iPhone, iPod visitors. with a growing share in Android, but really that's where the use is right now. Another key to planning that I'll touch on a little bit more in the speed section is responsive images. This is one of the most complicated parts of a responsive relaunch. Handling images tends to be about 60% of page weight on most sites. There's a great tool at thandlax.com called the pixel density converter. And what this does is it's a quick and easy tool where you can type in a number, a width, or an image, and it spits out the other measurements for other pixel densities. So if you're assuming you start your design process maybe with a standard non-retina pixel density, it's also going to give you the HDPI, the retina display, and the extremely high-res XHDPI as well. So just a quick, simple, easy tool to use at thandlax.com. So that's a little bit about the planning end. A key to planning is also prototypes and how you handle that, whether it's iterative or whether it's showing your client some kind of an in-browser prototype. I always like to remind myself when I go into a prototyping process what the purpose of prototypes is. To me, the purpose of a prototype is always to get to better, more useful work. There's several ways that we get to better, more useful work through prototyping. We can do early user testing, and that helps us support good and fast usability. We can use prototypes to visualize content strategies. So wireframes help us visualize and make real some of those things like RSS feeds or social media feeds. Prototypes really help us get buy-in. So they help us say to an audience, all right, here's roughly how the site's going to look. Here's roughly how it's going to work. They can help with client education. So if a client says, I'm just not sure how this is going to look in a mobile context, your prototype can begin to educate them about that. And finally, iterative building. You know, this is a recurring theme in responsive right now, the idea that the prototype that you begin with actually translates into your finished product, building responsive prototypes in browser that eventually become the finished site. So, you know, going into a look at a few different tools, I just wanted to state that purpose. The primary purpose of a prototype is to get to better, more useful work. And if it doesn't do that, it's crap. You know, okay, I'll back off from that. It may not be crap, but it could be an empty activity. You want to make sure you're supporting that idea of better work. So ask your clients with your prototypes to focus on the reading experience and focus on typography as the most important design choices. I think that this context, you know, and that's one of the nuances of HTML and CSS is that document presentation lives separately from document content. Style tiles are a way to say to a client, here's roughly what your headlines are going to look like, roughly what your subheads are going to look like, roughly what your body copy is going to look like, a color palette, maybe a few illustration treatments, and let them react to that. So you're not spending all the time designing a completely finished comp. You're designing something that allows them to respond to decisions before you spend 40 hours designing a really buttoned-up homepage that they might reject or react negatively to. We've started working with an in-browser version of style tiles. If you go to that style tile URL, you're going to see she basically, the maker, Samantha Warren, basically releases a Photoshop template. And what we've started doing is basically presenting it as HTML in the context of the browser so that there's no abstraction. A client doesn't have to look at something as a PDF. They can basically proof the styles in the browser. Really great tool, Typecast.com. It is a subscription-based service, but it is excellent. Integrates over 20,000 different fonts from all of the major font services, Google Fonts, Typekit, response.com, TypeDeck. And what this service allows you to do is quickly create a typographic prototype. So thinking about all of those usual suspects for tags and the document object model, you've got your H1, you've got your H2, you've got your paragraph, you've got your block quote. This service allows you to quickly style your HTML with. Typecast also has a template for generating style guides. Really useful tool for front-end developers, useful for clients who do some of their own development. Basically, you generate that prototype that I showed on the previous screen, and then there's a tab that converts that into a style guide where you can specify some of those elements like color, and then hand that off to your client as HTML. Sparkbox, really cool company that you should check out. Their site is csparkbox.com. They employ a dual prototyping method where they show a content prototype in conjunction with the responsive style tile. So like the style tile that I showed we've been using, they have their own homegrown version of that to get clients to react to things like color palette and typography. But they present that in conjunction with a mobile-first content prototype that shows the client how a little bit about what real content is going to look like in the browser and shows it in a single column mobile view so that the client can begin to understand hierarchy. So this really isn't your grandfather's wireframe right here. This is a new kind of deliverable that's designed specifically for the responsive web, for that multi-device idea. It's a really nice piece to look at because it gets to that idea of content first in one prototype, and it gets to kind of material honesty about the web, that style really is something that you can separate from content. Another prototyping tool that I'm a huge fan of that may be appropriate to your process is uxpin.com. I was going to try to do a UXPin speed run where I demonstrated previewing a responsive nav in about 5 minutes. That's how fast this tool is. It's a wonderful tool for basically creating responsive wireframes. And what you do is you can create a wireframe at whatever view you prefer, and the tool allows you to quickly create breakpoints for it. It duplicates all of the objects from the initial wireframe that you draw into the new breakpoint and allows you to adjust those to accommodate for the more narrow width. One of the best things about UXPin too is that it does support live in-browser previewing. So the second you design it, you have a live URL that you can show to a client, and they can log in, and they can actually drag their browser large and small to see how the prototype that you made is going to work at different widths. Also really useful for user testing. If you want to do early user testing, do that. And it doesn't require that you know HTML. So fast, doesn't require HTML, but it's in browser. So really, really a lovely combination of tools for prototyping. The gold standard, I think, that is due out on June 17th is Adobe Edge Reflow. So it's coming soon. It got previewed at Adobe Max conference at this year. It looks amazing. It allows you to import your PSDs directly into the prototyping tool. Photoshop also, they announced it, Photoshop this year allows you to export CSS, really lovely feature. So Reflow will import your PSDs, your CSS. Like UXPin, it allows you to add those media queries. And then finally, you can package it all up as HTML, CSS, and move it over to the editor of your choice. Adobe has been very clear that this is meant to be a prototyping tool. It is not meant to be a finished, responsive, production-ready code. But if you think about it, it's really going to be a great tool for demonstrating to clients how things like navigation work, and showing some of those style choices in context as well. And I think that Adobe took the feedback from the design community seriously. You know, people like Brad Frost were saying things like, you know, Photoshop's days are numbered, or PSDs are not the way of the future. Adobe is a company that heard that feedback, and they're responding to it, and they're trying to integrate their tools to be more useful for responsive designs. I probably misquoted Brad Frost there, by the way. Just wanted a heads up. Hopefully no one will incriminate me on the Twitters. So next up is this idea of iterative building. Instead of using specific tools to prototype your responsive designs, some shops are going to frameworks. So Foundation by Zurb is a great example of that. And what the idea is with this is that you start by building basically an active wireframe in the browser that's eventually going to become your design. I think that this kind of system is great for shops that have a lot of in-house talent, where the front-end developers are also reasonably good at optimizing HTML themselves. But I think it really is a more advanced method that requires you to be kind of deeply schooled and have that talent that has the visual ability and the ability to code. But the benefit of using a system like this to prototype is that you do have to know your HTML, you do have to know your CSS, but there's no throwaway work here. You know, we think back to that UX pen example. Those prototypes really don't help us pass the prototyping phase. If you work from rapid prototyping in actual HTML, then you're going to iterate and you're going to get your design to a more finished state, and your prototypes will actually become the code eventually. Zurb's done a great job of creating some out-of-the-box HTML templates for purposes of prototyping, which you'll see if you go to the site. They also have icon fonts available. They have ready-made off-canvas layouts, really popular nav convention and mobile right now. They have patterns for things like responsive tables. They provide instruction on handling things like SVG, and they have some other stencils built in. So if you are a designer-developer hybrid, or you have that ability in-house, I think that this method is really something that you should look at and consider. And it doesn't specifically have to be Zurb's Foundation. You could use something like Bootstrap. But you know, Zurb's done a really good job of trying to get to this idea of rapid prototyping. So I would look at them specifically for that. All right, want to talk specifically about tablets. You know, people think responsive design, they think of multiple devices, and tablets are going to be a hot topic for the next couple of years. Wanted to show you a few statistics to support this idea. Tablet traffic to the web surpassed smartphone traffic in December of last year. All countries in the world saw tablet traffic double or more in 2012. Users are spending 54% more of their time on tablets than they are on smartphones. So if we think about a portable device, a tablet isn't quite as portable, but it is getting much higher use statistics than smartphones. Typically, users are also reading more. They're looking at 70% more pages on tablets than they do on smartphones. You know, and tablets are predicted to outpace desktop and laptop combined sales around the year 2015. So that's something to really pay attention to, is indicators, early indicators, and it is a prediction based on sales figures, that tablets are going to be the primary way that consumers use the web. This is why we really need to be thinking about tablets now, because it's coming down the pipe, and we're seeing a huge shift with regards to global sales. Guy that you should follow, Global Moxie, also known as Josh Clark, and a quote by him and a link to a post that he has on his blog, where he says, new rule, every desktop design has to go finger-friendly. So that's his synopsis of designing for tablets and designing for touch. To build for the future, we really do need to make our responsive designs more tablet-friendly. I'm going to look at a few techniques that the big boys are doing to make responsive designs more tablet-friendly. Some of these designs are also adaptive. You notice with Google Plus that they deploy slightly different code to a mobile than they do to a desktop or a tablet. And that's, again, where that word multi-device comes back into play. But design convention to pay attention to right now is that a lot of the top companies on the internet are moving their primary navigation for their sites into easy range of fingers and thumbs. So for tablets, that means navigation is back in vogue on the sides, where someone doesn't have to reach across the tablet screen to get to it. Great example of this is on the recently relaunched Google Plus. Second is thinking about ways to adjust height to accommodate the dual nature of all tablets. So all tablets have this idea built in that a user can simply turn it and change the display. We hit that note in an earlier blog, but here it is shown more simply. Luke W. has a couple of great posts on designing for tablets as well. And there's a live example of this vertical media query in Apple's iPhone page. So the page doesn't necessarily change based on width, but it does change based on height. And the reason for that gets back to this idea of a user swapping the display in the context of the same device. Vertical media queries are not something you see a lot of right now, but I suspect this is something that's really going to blow up. Gmail actually has a vertical media query, so it'll actually make the individual listings in your email taller based on how much screen real estate is available. And when you start to see people like Apple and Google do it, it means that it's coming down the pipe, and a lot of people are going to start using those design conventions. Third is a design trend towards bigger touch target areas. So great example on good.is, really excellent online publication if you haven't checked it out for both content and design. Good.is, huge buttons, and this really responds to the trend of touch and trying to make things accessible for a person who's not using a mouse anymore. They're touching the tablet screen or they're touching a phone screen. MIT research showed that the average fingertip is 8 to 10 millimeters. And so most manufacturers actually say 7 to 9 millimeters minimum recommended, based on research they've done internally. I tend to trust MIT over Nokia, but that's just me. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, Doug, why millimeters? I don't design in millimeters. I design in pixels or ems or rems. The reason is pixel densities and resolutions vary based on the manufacturer. So I think starting with millimeters is a great way to think about the goals, and then obviously modifying the measurements a little bit to accommodate the devices that your visitors are coming to your sites from. Another convention I suspect we'll be seeing a lot more of, a little more common than the vertical media query, is picking up Sideswipe navigation. Yale School of Management has this experienced Yale SOM site that does this really, really well. You also notice their primary navigation is kind of tucked away on the lower left there in easy range for a tablet user. But the entirety of the site can be navigated by pushing left and right. And that convention is going to look suspiciously familiar if you use a lot of tablet apps. And I think that the whole of these points about tablet conventions really points to sites that are going to look more like apps. So sites that begin to pick up usability conventions that we've seen in apps for the last few years. And the side-swiping navigation might remind you of Flipboard or Feedly, one of those apps that really allows you to browse through different pages quickly and look for the visuals or look for the content that you're trying to get to. Finally, great site, QZ.com, Quartz, news site, shows off this new trend of anchoring content to the side of the browser. So for years, we've always put content directly to the side of the body. That's nothing new. That's old hat. But this new piece in tablet-friendly responsive is to anchor it to the side of the browser. And by doing that, again, you're keeping those things that you want the user to interact with in easy range of the edge of the tablet, where the user really doesn't have to move their hand at all. They're holding the tablet with their hands, and they can just sort of reach their thumb over and push the article that they want to read. Quartz is also a great example of those bigger button sizes if you want to take a look at that. Huge, touch-friendly buttons all over the site. Now we're going to talk about speed. Speed is a topic, it's a hot topic all over web design right now. Web performance is a term that you hear a lot. I'm trying to keep it a little bit more basic for a broad audience and this and a little bit more strategic, and I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to try to be a developer to you. I'm going to speak more to the design and the strategy end of it. A lot of people have probably been thinking about the war between skeuomorphic design and flat design. It's kind of over, I think. Flat design has won. It's the victor for the moment. I'm sure that in another 5 years there'll be a comeback for skeuomorphia, but for now, flat design is really the focus. And I think why flat design is so popular right now, one of the main reasons is speed. If we think about adding textures and finishes and drop shadow to a design, it means more asset management. And we're trying to get to really fast designs in a multi-device environment where we don't know the bandwidth, and we're going to assume mobile bandwidth. One of the realities of this speed idea is related to process and how we design and develop. You know, we do sites now that require different layouts for different breakpoints. An example of a site that we recently relaunched here at mStoner, webster.edu. And when we went about designing this, what we discovered is that we essentially had done 4 different layouts. Now, the desktop to widescreen is a small change. The desktop to tablet and tablet to phone is very different. So that's an extra level of design. It's an extra level of development to work on those media queries. And it means more time spent per breakpoint. You know, so we are spending more time on each individual layout, but we have to think about speed of process in terms of multiplying all of those different layouts times the browsers and the devices we're testing for. So a few of the baseline browsers we test for, IE 8, 9, and 10, Firefox 18 and later, Chrome 24 and later. We also tend to test on these devices that you see below as our baseline, maybe throw in a few different ones if the analytics prove that we need to, but that's kind of our baseline device testing lab. It really is taking more time to work on sites if we're doing our due diligence with this. We're multiplying the number of layouts that we're doing times that testing. Testing in different browsers and testing in different devices, it tends to slow things down a little bit. But what does that mean for our clients? Simple design obviously means something to us because it makes things easier across layouts, across devices, across browsers. But there's a real concern with clients and how to serve clients embedded in the speed idea. Page weight has a linear negative impact on conversions, page views, bounce rate, and returning visitors. If there's only one slide you pay attention to in the whole deck, this should be one that you dog ear. Page weight matters so much to critical metrics on a project. In fact, tests at Amazon showed that every 100 milliseconds increase in load time decreased their sales by 1%. Now think about that. Every 1/10 of a second increase in load time decreased their overall sales by 1%. That kind of shows you how critical speed is and how critical respecting page weight is. So again, speed touches nearly every measurable metric of a web project. I'll say that again because it's so important. Speed touches nearly every measurable metric of a web project in its entirety. And to me, what that means is that speed is the entire web team's problem. It's not just the developer's problem. As a strategist, that's my problem too. That's the designer's problem. I want to see design that doesn't include 12 different fonts on a page. It's the QA person's problem to pull up in the browser inspector and check page weight because it really gets back to that idea that the successful measurable outcomes on a project are all related to the page speed. So with that in mind, I pulled together 4 basic things that everybody on a web team can do to help with speed and help with web performance. So I'm not going to attempt to dive into the nerdery of real web performance. This is a baseline list that can be shared with the web team and say everybody should really have the capability to do these 4 things or to move these 4 ideas along. So number 1 is, if you don't know how to do it already, learn how to check page weight in your browser. The simple demo of how to do it in Chrome. You can either do Command-Option-I in Chrome to bring up the developer tools, which is what you see on the lower half of this page, or you can go to the upper right of the page and do Show Developer Tools, or you can right-click anywhere on the page and do, you'll see a thing that says Inspect Element. That'll bring up your developer tools as well. Once you see the bottom of the page open up like this, the thing that you want to click on is this Network tab. And then you're going to want to reload the page that you're trying to measure page weight for. What that's going to do in Chrome is spit out these statistics along the bottom where you can start to see the number of page requests and page weight for a given page or for a given site. And that's, you know, this is all built into the browser. This is something that anybody can do to pull up some baseline page weight metrics. 2 is work to devise a solution to the responsive images problem on the CMS level. So there's a lot of talk right now about the best way to handle responsive images. I'm sort of solution agnostic in that I think there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's a lot of different ways to implement this technically. But for most .edu clients, we're talking about people who are managing 15+ editors. Your end user is never going to have your end use editor is never going to have the technical know-how to manage responsive images. So if you solve the responsive images problem on the CMS level, you're providing them with a solution that really respects the audience, that respects the person who's going to experience the content. I don't want to be partisan to any one CMS. I do know that Omni Update has an image instancing solution. I also know that for open source solutions, if you happen to use WordPress, there's some plugins that basically will automatically handle, it'll automatically create different instances of an image for you. So what that means is within the CMS, an end editor can upload an image, it'll create multiple versions of it, and then the code will deploy the appropriate image you know, based on the width of the browser. So that helps us get to faster images, faster image deployment for our audiences. So if you're not a developer, you should be able to talk to people on your web team about this idea. Let's come up with a solution that solves the images problem and issue on the CMS level. 3 is that you may not be a designer, or you may not have the best design eye, or maybe you do. Minimize the number of custom fonts and external widgets per page. So after images, these 2 things tend to be the main offenders for web performances. Designers, particularly coming out of the era of skeuomorphic design, tended to be using a lot of custom fonts within the page. I've always been of the mindset that you really don't need more than 2 or 3 fonts per page total. And by limiting the number of font choices in that way, you're going to get to a more contemporary, flatter looking design, and you're going to respect page weight. It's also going to help you if you limit those number of external API embeds. I think the AddThis API, which is a common one in higher ed, has about 75 page requests in it. Facebook is up there too. I think most Facebook embeds have 50+ page requests. So even if you're not a developer or a designer, you can look objectively at a page and say, that's too many fonts, or how many fonts are we using? Or you can look at the number of external widgets and say, how much weight is that adding to a page? And finally, you don't have to be a specialist in everything. That's the beauty of working on large-scale .edu web projects. Hire and talk to competent developers, and I think that allows you to focus on whatever your interests are in the web. If you're working with a web team that's not as competent, you can always bring in a freelancer. You can always bring somebody in from the outside to counsel you, to help you come up with a performance checklist, really whatever your cup of tea is. So what are some examples of good and fast in higher ed? Have three to show you that I want to walk through real quickly. One is NotreDame.edu. .NET Magazine gave this one of the top 25 sites of 2012. Really stellar example in terms of both design and performance. Basically only has 23 page requests. The mobile size is 333 kilobytes. The desktop and widescreen display is 2.8 megabytes. They're using a technique called res to accomplish this, where there's a huge dynamic range between the mobile size and the desktop size, but a great example to look at for both speed and design choices. CT.edu, which is Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. This is a college system, so a little different than many of our clients, but lovely example of RWD, lovely responsive design. 21 page requests, 410 kilobytes, and they've devised a method. They're not using any dynamic range code. Their mobile code is basically the same size as their desktop site. So they've solved the responsive image problem in a slightly different way by just making the site really small. So it's really small in all contexts. Finally, great one to look at. Lovely example of flat UI, UVM, University of Vermont. 38 page requests, 451 at mobile size, and 753 kilobytes at a desktop size. So lightning fast site on both mobile and desktop. Great example to look at. Lovely work by University of Vermont. So got to give a shout out to Erick Rowan, Manager of Interactive Development at Notre Dame, for the examples and data in the previous slides. Also a shameless plug for his wonderful blog, weedygarden.net. And you're going to notice he has a higher ed RWD directory that he maintains that I suggest anybody on this seminar would find use in. Few other useful links on web performance. SteveSouders.com, guy who's written several books if you want to get nerdy with it and take a deep dive into the idea of speed and web performance. Ilya Grigorovic, which is igvita.com. He is a great mind producing some bleeding edge thinking on web performance. He's the guy who's advocating for all Google pages to load in less than a second. And within higher ed, another great resource is Dave M. Olson. That's dmolson.com. He is author of a Smashing Magazine book, a co-author of a Smashing Magazine book, and writes frequently on web performance. I would suggest checking his site out. All right, I've got a few minutes to talk about usability and to take some questions. So usability is another key in delivering that idea of speed. It's not just speed of how quickly pages load, but how quickly your audiences can accomplish a task. How quickly can they get from point A to point B in this multi-device world? There's a UX designer named Timothy Whalen, who's somebody worth following if you're interested in UX design. He is a UX guy over at Deloitte Digital. And he has a great quote from this blog. If you aren't talking to your users and letting them have a say, you aren't doing UX. Keep the user at the heart of our work. And I think that that's so critical into understanding the benefit of UX over ornamental design. You know, design with user testing is UX, and I think that's more powerful than design alone. What's a minimum viable strategy for post-desktop usability testing? So it was pretty easy to do usability testing back when it was desktop first or desktop only. How do we adjust our practices for a multi-device web? The first strategic idea is, if you can, always test your prototypes and your alpha site. So, you know, back in the day, alpha site testing was common to make sure that we weren't messing anything up. If you back up to the thoughts that we went through in the prototyping section of this, it's critical to get your prototypes in front of audiences early so that you can expose design flaws. So rather than build something all the way that may not be totally sound, by working iteratively with a system like Derb Foundation or UXPen, you can get your prototypes in front of users and say, how easy is it for you to get to an application process, or how easy is it for you to give online, and test the assumptions you're making before you plug 40, 60, 80 hours into design and development. 2 is perform critical path testing for each breakpoint where your layout changes. So, backing up to that Webster example, I pulled basically our main 3 breakpoints. We had a mobile breakpoint, we had a tablet breakpoint, and we had a desktop breakpoint. And the key here is to think about, in any scenario where you're modifying layout, it's worth putting the layout decisions in front of the user and saying, can you find this? Are you able to find this? Is the page still working as well? And I'm not talking about spending a week on this. I'm talking about putting this in front of 5 to 10 different people to get opinions. And usually that's where insights start to emerge, is around 5 to 10 different users. 3 is test users on different devices to confirm usability for input types. So a minimum would be testing for mouse and trackpad versus touch. This is so critical in the age where touch screens on smartphones and tablets are going to be the main way that people use the web. Is we don't want to put the desktop aside. That's really kind of where our traffic is coming from right now. But we want to make sure that we're designing in a way that respects both mouse and trackpad input and that touch input. So make sure that you are testing on multiple devices. 4th is always test mobile. What we've noticed with our own post-desktop usability practice is that the mobile breakpoint is really where the most different decisions are made. So, in those layout decisions, when you're stacking to a single column and when you're using things like off-canvas navigation, that's really where things get wacky, and the way that the site behaves is totally different than a desktop site. Couple of quick tools to run through. GoToMeeting.com allows you to observe, enable a user's webcam so you can see their face and record. Pros of this, it works remotely. Beautiful for remote testing. Cons, can't record mobile remotely. There's a way you can hack this by asking your desktop users to make the browser mobile side, but that doesn't really get to the input idea of watching somebody actually use touch input. So, this hack would allow you to, it's allowed us to expose some design flaws in the past, but it doesn't really offer insight about whether or not your touch input is working. Another great tool, UXRecorder.com. This one does work on mobile. You can make the user the presenter, enable the webcam on the camera, the tablet, and record. Pros of this, it works great. It does mobile great, it does tablets great. The cons, it does not work remotely. There's a third method that MailChimp pioneered late last year called reverse laptop hugging. You can kind of see what the method is in this screenshot. And what you would do with this method is basically use your screen recording software to do a remote test. You would need to make sure that all participants had a laptop as well as a phone. But you have the user join the GoToMeeting on their laptop, or the recording session on their laptop, flip it around and face their phone, and basically you're using the laptop shared software to record the mobile usability. And in this way, you actually are observing somebody remotely using a phone. So it's hack-ish, but it's one of the only ways out there right now to perform mobile remote usability testing, which is always a nice thing to do. I think the closing thought here is to embrace the complexity of the multi-device web, design and test for speed and simplicity. Really try to keep those 2 ideas in your head the entire time. Thanks, guys, so much for listening to me. We're going to stick around a couple minutes to handle questions, and we'll do a blog post of the deck tomorrow, and we'll have a recording of this up sometime next week. So basically, feel free to stay on the line while I handle any questions that come in. Visit the mStoner blog tomorrow to download the deck itself, and look back next week if you want to listen to the sound of my voice once again in the live version of the webinar that we'll post. Thanks again, and I'm going to flip out of here to take questions.
Hey, awesome session, Doug. I can't believe how fast the last hour went by. all of the different tools and the awesome graphics. I know even though I was on mute, I was laughing a lot during your presentation, and I imagine folks in the audience were too. One other reminder for anybody who needs to drop off, because it is 3 p.m. Eastern, there will be a post-webinar survey presented to you when you log out of GoToWebinar, and it's just so helpful to us when you can take that survey and spend 2 minutes doing that. We appreciate it, and you know, Doug's put obviously a lot of time into creating this webinar, and if you can take 2 minutes of your time to let him know how he did, you know, that's just really useful feedback for us. We do have a bunch of questions that have come in over Twitter or through the control panel, and definitely now is the time to continue asking questions. First of all, where does SVG, or scalable vector graphics, fit into the performance picture? The person who asked is actually one of the folks who works on the uvm.edu website, and they are currently working on SVG banner logos, and they're just wondering where that fits in.
Yeah, that is a great question. Basically, SVG is a highly underutilized technology for rendering content in a web page. If you think about, you know, for listeners who may not be as familiar with the technology, a vast variety of what you see on the web is pixel graphics, right? And SVG is basically vector-based rendering of that. The downside to SVG is it doesn't work in some of the older browsers, but the upshot of it is it's a much more efficient way of rendering content. So I would say how it fits in right now for .edu would be to understand what browsers your audiences are coming in on, and presuming that presuming that you're mostly in range of browsers that can handle SVG, that you use it to render persistent page elements like the logo, or, you know, if you have a mascot graphic or something like that. Vector-based design is basically very good for things like logos or mascots. Or screen back seals would be another application of it. You know, anything that has a really clean shape to it. So I hope I answered the question. I think that SVG has a much bigger future in responsive design. It's just an underutilized technology right now.
Another question that came in through Twitter, do you have any resources for responsive design for broadcast emails?
Responsive design for broadcast emails. You know, the tough thing about responsive design in email clients is that you don't always have control of how the email client is going to display the HTML and the CSS that are embedded therein. I'm going to have to kind of look into that, but off the top of my head, I don't. And I think, you know, the thing that I've seen other people talking about is exactly what I mentioned, that you have very limited control over what someone sees when they're using an email client.
Okay, so what are some of the best CMS solutions you've seen to the responsive image problem, Doug?
Yeah, I think this is where I get myself into trouble in terms of being able to talk about all of them eloquently. I know that on the update, and I know that Terminal 4 and Hannon Hill Cascade Server all have either have or were working on it as of Q3 of last year when I talked to them. We're working on image instancing for responsive, and what that means is they may not actually call it instancing, like, you know, each company might have its own proprietary term for it, but what it is you upload a single version of the image, and the CMS automates the creation of different sizes of it. And it's not necessarily out of the can for all of them, so that's something that you need to make clear in the spec when you're working with the vendor is, you know, if you're working with Terminal 4, you're working with on the update saying, we would really like to solve the image problem on the CMS side. I understand you handle image instancing. How can we enable that for an end user so that it helps us respect, you know, the mobile visitor who's on very limited bandwidth. So I know that those three do it. I know that there are modules in Drupal or WordPress if you're more interested in open source solutions. And essentially what, you know, those open source solutions require is that you have somebody on staff who's familiar with development to where they can install it and train people on how to use it. So those are 5. Those are the only 5 that I can speak to off the top of my head.
Great. So how would you solve the external widgets problem when using things like social media?
Yeah, great question. The most common way that people are solving it right now is just through really simple text links. So it sounds boring. You know, text or graphic links. I shouldn't say text links alone. But you think about something like the Add This API, where it's basically you know, pulling in something that adds a lot of page requests. Simply doing external graphics is enough to get to somebody to the app. You know, so I think that is kind of the baseline SaaS solution right now is either conditional code that says when you're on mobile, it's going to deploy in place of the Add This widget or whatever the heavy widget is, it's going to deploy code that says these are just graphical links, or basically reverse engineer from the simplest solution and say we're not going to embed a bunch of complex third-party APIs in our desktop design, which I think is viable too. And
the last question I believe we have, unless any others come in over the next few minutes, is it more important if you're redesigning your site or a portion? Sorry, I'm not presenting this well. Let's try that again. If you're working on a piece of the site, say like a planned giving website or alumni association site, is it more important that it stays consistent with the current look and feel of the larger .edu, or that it's built for the future, accommodate all of the issues that you brought up?
I'm going to say something that I never would have said when I was younger, and it's consistency is overrated as a value. And what I mean by that is I think that it's easy for designers, particularly designers who don't know a lot about the technical end, to say that consistency is the most important thing. Now, that's not to say that consistency isn't important, you know, particularly at .edus where there's a whole lot of barons and there's a whole lot of fiefs in the kingdom. But what I'd say is think about the end user. Is an end user evaluating for consistency, or are they evaluating for the experience they get and their ability to complete a task? So I would tend to say that you know, I'm of the mind that speed trumps almost anything. You know, speed and usability trumps almost anything. I think consistency kind of comes after that. So hopefully I didn't get in trouble with too many directors of marketing that are on the call, but I do stand by the statement that speed trumps almost anything.
Okay. Well, Doug, I think that is about it. Oh, sorry, one more question. Any advice for a one-person web team? You know, if you had to prioritize all of these issues, page weight, responsive design, valid code, you know, where does someone who's a higher ed solo start?
Yeah, I think what I would focus on as a solo person is ready-made solutions and patterns. So, you know, you think about the person who's doing it all themselves. They have to be the designer. They have to be the builder. They're going to be working directly with the CMS team to get you know, their solution in place, or maybe they're even building Drupal or a WordPress solution on their own. What I would say is look for things that already exist where you can put your focus on content and put your focus on you know, delivering a great experience. So that could mean looking at, a ready-made theme in Drupal that's responsive, that you can tailor a little bit to look like your institution. But I think the more you get into the weeds and into the very specific nuances of responsive implementation, the less you're able to function as that one-person shop. That one-person shop really does have to focus on everything, and I think content should always be the first priority for that kind of for a person in that role.
All right. Doug, I think that's it. So thank you so much for sticking around these past 10 minutes, Doug, and to all of our attendees. And one more reminder about that short survey when you log out. Don't forget to join us on June 19th for our webinar on lifetime engagement management. We'll be posting the slides and an archive of this webinar on mstoner.com. We'll also be emailing you the archive of the webinar probably early next week. So watch your email for that. Thanks so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of the week. Bye-bye.